this computer. Okay, guys, thanks very much for joining in the recording. We're just about to kick off the main presentation where we're going to go through Training Peaks metrics, and then we will stop there and we'll have Q&A for the people who are late. Oh, 1 second, folks. We've got a couple of late joiners. Okay, share. All right, can people see my screen? It should be a presentation, a little thumbs up. Okay, cool. So what we're going to, myself and Mark are going to talk through today is in terms of, why is it working? There we go. Right. What are the metrics in Training Peaks and what do they mean? We'll have specific Q&A on those metrics. And again, as I said, we'll cover any Q&A you have at the moment. Anything that's bothering you about the way your programs are organized, or your plans organized, or anything that you've read in the internet and you think that some guy has a wonderful idea, allow us to critique it. Okay, so what I'm going to show you here now is what we have are I'm going to throw a couple of acronyms at you. ATP is Annual Training Planner. This is the graph that you will see in Training Peaks, that as you go through your plan, and you can access it by dashboard, and you'll see something like this. You'll see a lot of blue, or you see pink lines, and you'll see all this. So what does that mean? There's a lot to it, but we're going to break it down into very simple layman's terms, and allow you to judge how your training's going. The blue line here, the blue section here, is what Training Peaks calls chronic training load. Okay, don't get freaked out by the terminology, because we're going to break it down for you. Essentially, it means fitness. The way that Training Peaks captures the data that you upload from your sessions and your program, and then it gives you a number, because triathletes all want a number that they can compare themselves to themselves to others, and go, I'm bigger, better, faster, right? So this is how they get that. Now, the chronic train load or fitness, it takes into account how many sessions you've done in the previous 42 days. We'll talk a little bit about the session, and how hard they were, and how heavy they are, how intense they were. Okay, so I'm just going to mute anyone who hasn't muted already, just in case we get some background noise. I think we're good there. Okay, cool. So I think that might be Lorne. Lorne, can you mute yourself? Sorry.
Yeah, it's muted now. Yep.
Okay, cool. Excellent. All right. Okay, so the blue stuff is your chronic training load, and we'll talk about that, but it's your fitness, right? The bigger the number, in theory, the fitter you are. We'll critique that in a second. The ATL, or your acute training load, is your fatigue, how tired you are. So that takes into account what you've done in a more recent time frame, and that's the pink line. Okay, so we have our CTL, our fitness here, our pink line, our fatigue here. And then there's the third metric that they talk about, which is our training stress balance, which essentially if you take one from the other, it gives you your form. So to get fitter and get more blue, and a higher blue number, you obviously have to train harder, which will mean that you're going to get tired, more fatigued, right? And then what you're interested there is when you take away the blue number from the pink number, and you get essentially what your form is. So it's laymanized, blue, bigger the blue, the fitter you are. The higher the pink, the more tired you are. The lower the yellow line, the poorer you're going to race on the day. Okay, but just think blue fitness, pink fatigue, and yellow freshness. Okay, hang on 1 second. I'm going to let someone in here. We'll talk about how that. We're going to go through some examples to bring that to light. Okay, I know this, but they're the terminology. But just always think about it in something that you can understand. Everyone understands fitness. Everyone understands, fatigue. Everyone, freshness is probably better version than form. Okay. Okay, oops, where's that one going?
And then, yeah, just on that graph, it looks very busy, but the red dots or the dots indicate days. So every red dot is an activity, or if it's on the bottom line, on the bottom axis, that's a rest day. So this athlete hasn't done any training that particular day. And then, once that red dot moves up on the scale, that's your TSS score, that each workout or the workout's calculated TSS value. And then the blue dot is the right-hand scale, which is your intensity factor. Typically out of, if you're looking at 1.0, that's a particularly hard session. So harder the intensity in blue, and the red is your TSS score for the day.
Cool. And this graph as well, I'll demonstrate it later on. You can actually view it over certain periods of time. So you can view it over the last 3 months, last week, or what's really interesting for me is, seeing as I've been doing Ironman for the last, 10 years, you can actually view it for lifetime, and you can see where I'm obviously peaking for a race where my blue is really high, and also my fatigue is high. But then also when I take my off season, the blue comes down and all the rest. That's when your CTL or your fitness does decrease because you're not training as intensely, but it's not a bad thing. And we'll talk about that in a second. Okay. So now, all right. Some things to note. Okay. The TSS that what Mark has spoken about, as I said, these are the numbers that feed your fitness. And TSS equals training stress score. Okay, layman, how hard that session was. Okay, so lots of TSS, or how hard that session was, increases your CTL or your fitness. Okay, there's a mathematical equation that Training Peaks works off, and here it is, right? I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a an actuarial, but essentially it takes into all this information says here is it tells you that it takes a certain amount of data before your CTL fitness starts making sense. So if you log on, I have this problem with some athletes who have just started with us, and like they sort of go, oh look, my friend's CTL is like 110 and I'm at 5. And I went, okay, well, there's a couple of things, but I beat him last season. And you go, well, there's the reason why. You don't have enough data in Training Peaks for it to calculate a correct or even an approximately correct CTL or fitness. And this is because it requires Training Peaks takes the previous 42 days to upload all those TSS or those completed activities and give you your CTL. So if you're only working off 21 days, your fitness is going to be artificially depressed as such. The key things, as I said, is also it's important to look at this number, and we'll go through why this number is good and why it is not something that you should fixate massively on, or panic if you don't have that number is as good as your friend or what it used to be, etc., because there's other factors. But it is useful if you look at it in trends rather than an absolute number. As I said, if I was to pick up my CTL at the moment or my fitness and compare it to Mark would be guaranteed be twice as his fitness would be at least twice what I'm at the moment. That is because I haven't actually trained now for the last 2 weeks, and Mark has actually been training really consistently for the last 3 months. So my CTL is way down. Mark's is just on a really upward trend. But does that mean that come race day, Mark is going to absolutely crush me in a race? Quite possibly, bad example, but but on the day it'll be closer than you'd think. Okay. And as I said, because what we need to look at is the trends. If your CTL or your fitness is going up, and you get that from using a structured plan, having clear progression, a lot of consistency in your sessions, and completing the sessions as they're designed, that's what increases your CTL over time. So the trends are important. The number can be somewhat useful. Because, for example, when Mark and myself sat down and Mark started designing my plan for this season, he looked at when I did my PB, which would have been, whatever, at this stage 3 years ago. And he said, what was your CTL then, or your fitness number? And it was 160. He said, right, we need to get you back there. And he's built the plan to get me to that point. So it's useful there in that scenario, but not as on its own. There is a feature in Training Peaks, which most people have seen it, where it gives you a projected fitness number. And I caution people on this because it is indicative only, because people sort of go, look, oh, my plan says my CTL by my time my race comes around is going to be 50. And that's a disaster because I'm now 90. And I said, but that also is misleading, because if your sessions aren't built in training stress scores, as in the intensity of the session, it's not going to be accurate. So looking at that feature, and I'll demonstrate in a second, don't sweat it. There's other things to note. Data glitches can skew data. I have people who, when they upload from Garmin to Training Peaks, they duplicate the data, and they come around and you're looking, and these guys have a CTL or fitness of 250, and go, oh, okay. So you're actually twice as well, you're fitter than Jan Frodeno. That's pretty cool. But it's not, because they've just duplicate sessions, and Training Peaks is garbage in, garbage out. So you need to tidy that up. And then sometimes the data can get a bit messed up when it's uploaded, and instead of giving you an accurate training stress score of how hard the session was, it gives you like a 99999, and again that explodes the data, and then you have to be aware that you'll find that. You'll see that in the graph, the dot is miles up that way. Other things that these metrics don't take into account, like I could turn up with my CTL or fitness in Texas, and I could be at 160 or 170, and I might not perform. And that might be a case of I might be carrying an injury. I might have picked up an injury just before the race. I might be carrying extra weight, which is going to slow me down. I might just have a mental meltdown, and I have history of these in races. So it's no guarantee that these figures are useful, and we'll show examples of now, but not prescriptive. Just because you have a good fitness CTL, it doesn't mean you're going to get a certain time. It doesn't mean you're going to get a certain position. Mark, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to echo that, turning up on race day is about getting all of those factors, along with you on race day. Weight obviously is important, but also, turning up on race day with your nutrition plan, executing that well on the day, so having a good CTL number on race day should give you a real mental boost, and you're fit and ready to race. But make sure you've got the rest of your A game there with you. Don't leave components behind. You have to bring everything to execute a really solid race.
Okay. All right. Okay. Next up. Okay, Mark, you can take the slide then. I think I realized I completely messed up our presentation order.
You did. We had this agreed before the call, and I was going to do the first 4 slides, and yeah, Steve, but fair play, you did a grand job.
Put me in a microphone, I just can't resist.
I know, just put your camera and you're gone. Yeah, so this is an example of an athlete that Steve was coaching, that was, questioning, the numbers and what the graph was actually showing them. And look, they are busy graphs when you first see them, and if you're not used to them. But essentially what we're seeing here is, the red arrow is tracking the blue line, which is indicating an increase in fitness. The tick, that's what we want to see, the athletes getting fitter. The blue and black lines are showing that we're getting some rest intervals there before the race, and then, which is having the correct impact. So what is the conclusion here is, yes, the plan is working, everything's going in the right direction, and it's progressing well.
Okay, so again, well, the athlete actually is on the call, so he actually, the person in question was a little nervous about a marathon he was meant to do. He actually followed the plan, got a PB in his marathon, got a PB in his half Ironman. He got a PB in his Ironman as well. So you probably know who you are at this stage. You probably might even recognize your graph. But so, as I said, these are the things you look for. You don't try to delve into mass. You don't go, well, hang on, what does that TSS mean? Relative to what does this dot here? It looks like it's completely out of sync. Leave that to the coach. But as I said, as long as your blue is increasing, your pink is gonna increase as well. And then you're come close to race day, you're increasing your form. You're taking into account your extra rest days. You're taking into account your taper. You're allowing your form to actually recover. And that's how you manage these things. Okay, so we'll go on to the next slide. Mark, do you want to just talk through the target CTLs? As I've seen as I've stolen most of your material to start.
Yeah, so as we talked about before, the CTL, which is the blue line in your performance management chart in TrainingPeaks, and some really broad scales here to look at. If you're going to be looking to do a sprint race, somewhere between 40 and 105. Like I said, it's a broad scale, and really depends on your goals and your aspirations in that race as well. Standard distance between 55 and 125. Half distance 70 and 140. And then the full distance is 85 to up towards 210, which I would say would probably be the upper marker anyway. So you can just generally see that, you do need more of a CTL, at the base or the lower end of the scales to be able to race particular distances. But then, the more competitive you want to be, the more you want to be towards the middle ground of those numbers, obviously depending on your age as well. And then if we look at this excellent athlete we have here at, showing his numbers, these are an example of two particular races that Steve completed. So the top one is a PB, which was Ironman Barcelona. And you can see here from the fitness, we've got 135, fatigue of 104, and form of 21. So in really good shape for that particular race, and got a PB of 940, which in Barcelona is a cracking time to complete. And then we look at the next race, which I believe was Ironman Italy, if I'm correct, Steve?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, cool. And fitness of 124, so not a huge difference. Fatigue, again, not a huge difference. Form, yeah, it's okay. Would you expect to see a time of 11:22 on a similar-ish course to Barcelona? Probably the same sort of elevation, slow run, i.e. very flat. No, I would expect those times to be roughly the same for that course. So, what happened on this particular day that caused, to have a substandard race, shall we say? And this is where the other bits of the A game, you need to bring to the race. Other things can happen, other things can impact you. And I'll let Steve explain, the difference between those, it's his personal experience. So Steve, you want to share that with us?
Yep. So, and Mark's right as well. Like the numbers aren't massively different. As I said, if anything, I was a little bit more rested going into Ironman Italy. Ironman Barcelona went perfectly for me. By the way, there was absolutely no way I wasn't showing you my PB time in this presentation. It's not often you get 18 people to look at your PB and go, "Ooh, he can move." I had a great swim. I caught a bit of a pack in the swim, and it came out very high up for me. The bike was perfect conditions. There was no wind. It was slightly overcast in terms of the cloud cover, so it was perfect. I got my nutrition right all day long. The run, again, it was nice and cool. I was expecting a bit of a faster run, but my run nutrition slightly let me down. overall, absolutely delighted with that time. The difference, even though I was roughly as fit and even slightly more rested for Italy, swim, it was an Australian exit, which slows you down. Australian exit is when you have to run out. You have to do 2 loops, and there's a bit where you're running on the sand. It disorientates you because you have to run up, and you're kind of your body, your blood flow goes from there to up there. Bit disorientating. And got back into stroke. I didn't really catch that much of a draft. The stronger swimmers got away very quickly. On the bike, I actually had a puncture. I was feeling a bit demotivated afterwards. I got pinged for a drafting penalty incorrectly. Yes, incorrectly. I just finished my puncture. I was feeling really miserable with myself, and some guy flew past me and went, "Oh no!" And I wasn't even thinking. I just went, maybe I'll just take a little bit of a pull. And then the minute I pulled in behind him, and the motorbike was right beside me. Go, there you go. All right, so I got a drafting penalty. Okay, me culpa sometimes it's okay to be bad. And then on the run, I had a complete mental shocker. And was it Mark's son will tell you this moment? I ran past him, and I normally run my gels on my race belt. And my mind was all over the place because in my mind, this is a PB course. And I was racing one of our friends who had always beaten so far. And then just weird, my mind went to mush. And I actually turned around, and Mark's son was applauding, going, "Come on, Steve." And I actually turned around and I took off my race belt and handed it to him and said, "I don't need this anymore," and ran off. I leaving him with my number and all my gels. And he was going, "Steve." So, and I didn't meet him again to the next loop. And he said, "I think you need this." And at that stage, my nutrition was out the window. So my puncture, drafting, and then just a mental meltdown. So that's, again, things that can happen on a day, right? And it was quite a day. By the way, Mark was racing the same race, and he went under sub 10 and had an absolute superb time. Congratulations, Mark. And our friend did beat me.
I've just put 2 and 2 together, actually. This race started badly when you got off the plane.
That's right.
Didn't it? We were driving, we hired a van. Sorry, this will take 30 seconds. Sorry to go off on a tangent. We were driving down the motorway in a hired van, 4 bikes in the back and 5 athletes and 2 supporters. Driving down, Steve's doing directions, and he's saying, "Right, we need to go right here," which was back to the Bologna, and we're going towards Serbia. I said, no, it's this way. No, but my hotel's that way. He'd booked his hotel in the wrong city, so it turned out anyway. That was I think that was another reason for a substandard performance.
Also, yeah, so again, prepare to prepare to fail. And also our learning experience is that you handle all the logistics to Mark. So Mark's done the accommodation booking for America. And he's also told me what flights to book on. So again, there's other factors. All right, so our last slide on this before I do a little bit of a demo. The rules of thumb as well. There is ways of you need to adjust your training based on what the figures are saying. Your training stress balance or your form should always be around between 10 and 30 points. If you're pushing and you're seeing that your form is minus 30, you've overtrained and you need a bit of a rest day. And this is when you'll see your fatigue or your pink line shoot right up. And that's at that stage. If you're self-coaching, you got to go out. Wow, listen, and you'll know it yourself. There'll be other things that will tell you aside from a data point in the machine. They go like, "Oh, my motivation's low. I'm really struggling to get out of bed. Everything's sore." Your resting heart rate might be elevated. This is another data point you can look at. Take more rest. You can also undertrain if your TSB or your as I said, form is going up to the point where, and you're not near a race, as in, and it's not in a recovery cycle, you're not pushing yourself hard enough. So keep an eye on the TSB, as in your training stress balance. And that's something that we do for our coached athletes, but also something that you should do if self-coached. Right, next up, I'm kind of conscious that I want to get time. So a little bit of an exercise. And again, I'm seeing how much you were paying attention. So looking what we discussed earlier, this is me again, right? Because it's all about me. The this is my Barcelona time when I went in and my fitness was 135. And my fatigue was 104, and my form was 100, was 20, right? I got 9 hours and 40. The other one again, which is Italy, which is 124, my fatigue was 81 and my form was 40. And again, you saw what happened there. I there was some elements and I kind of underperformed. I got 11 hours and 22. Based on this number here, this is a fitness of 100. This is me again now. It's 146. My fatigue was 126 and my form was 10. Do you think that my number of my time was, where would you put my time on this scale? This being, was it better than 940? Was it, well, actually, it could be ruined that because I said that's my PB. Or what sort of time would you predict, as I said, and in between the scale of 940 and 1120? Feel free to shout out and unmute.
11 hours.
11 hours we have. Anyone know the takers?
12.
12.
It completely
10.5.
depends on the course.
Don't you ruin it, Marie Staunton.
Sorry. Sorry.
You know this answer. Okay, we've got 10 hours, we have 11 hours, we have 12 hours. And I've muted Marie because she's ruining my trick question. Sorry, Marie. The answer, in fact, is it was 12 hours 25. But I'd also like to point out I actually did quite well age group wise, and Marie actually hit the nail on the head. This was on Ironman Lanzarote, which is one of the hardest courses out there. It's a mass start swim in a choppy sea. If you've never seen it, Google it, and you'll actually get to see it. It's like everyone piling in like lemmings. It's scary as hell, especially if you're a weak swimmer like me. Almost 7 hours on the bike, which is very new, but it's hilly, that's windy, and the road surface is good, but it's just a brutal bike, an incredible one, but brutal. And then the run, it's just at that stage it's hot, your legs are fried, and at one point they run you by an was it the end of a runway? So you're thinking, listen, there's nothing else that God can throw at me at this point in time. And then the airplanes start taking off and they sandblast you, and you're just going like, is this all you've got? So whilst I did well, whilst my numbers were good, it was the course. So that's why. And the point is, you've got to take into account the course, and it doesn't just because you've got a high CTL doesn't mean you get a fast time. Okay, now I'm trying to think whether or not no. We had another slide here, which I managed not save. So I just want to wrap this up and I'll show you where you can find this information so you can have a look yourself. Your CTL or your fitness and your fatigue and your form are useful metrics, but only not at a point in time. They're useful in a trend. They're no indicator of how you perform on a race day because there's other elements of that. There's equipment, nutrition, pacing, weather, course. They also aren't any indication of where you'll end up in your age group, because they're a better indicator. If you turn up and you have a higher CTL than someone, you should actually do all right again. But if they're a stronger biker, all the CTL and the ATL and your TSB will help you do is figure out how you are relative to that point in time. It's another metric that you use with the other metrics, and to actually hopefully help you race yourself better on the day. Mark, do you want to add to that? And again, sorry if I stole your slide.
No, okay. The only thing I would add is, when you're looking at on your workouts per day or each session, you will see a drop down beside the TSS value that you can change between a couple of different metrics that you use for TSS, depending on the session as well. So if you're using you're doing a bike session, the most accurate one is just TSS, it's called, and that's based on power, which is an absolute value. But you've also got the option there to change it to heart rate as well. So it's interesting sometimes when you're looking at your workouts, flip it between heart rate and TSS, just to give you an indication of the difference in the two. I mean, heart rate is so variable. It's not a great metric to measure against. You know, if you're riding along and you're thinking about winning the race, your heart rate will jump 20 beats. So it's not that accurate where power is absolute. You know, as an example of that, riding into a strong headwind, you're pushing out 220 watts. That's 220 watts. That's it. That's an absolute number. So it doesn't matter if you're in a headwind or not, you're still pushing out the same power numbers, which is why it's the most accurate measurements. The running training stress score is based on your pace. So again, it's probably it is the second most accurate measurement. And again, you can flip that between pace and heart rate as well. And there's a couple of other ones, swimming ones, really just at the moment, it's in beta format. So really wouldn't rely too much on that one. And then obviously heart rate is probably the less accurate one of them all.
Okay.
That's me, Steve.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. So I'm also just going to show you a bit of the screens to actually show you where you find all this stuff on Training Peaks. Can you guys see my Training Peaks screen? Okay,
Yep.
fine. All right. Easiest place to find is on the right-hand side. There you have our fitness, CTL, fatigue, and a TSB. There is now, apologies, due to my injury, I normally have way more impressive stats in my Training Peaks. But where you will find the information in terms of the performance chart, which we were looking at, you click on dashboard. Okay. And here you have a whole heap. Oh my God, I have fallen off a cliff. So here is my performance management chart, which we discussed. This is which captures your fitness and your fatigue and your form over time. Okay. And as you can see, this is now set up for the last year. As you can see, and you can change that information here. You know, let's now look for the last 90 days. I think that would be plus apply and close. As you can see, I was actually making up a good head of steam around here, but now with the Christmas came along. Sorry, and then I've got my injury and I'm just steadily going down. But in one way, ironically enough, my form is very good because I'm not fatigued. So that's how you find that. And you can, as Mark said, you can just check out if you want to just see how you've been doing for your bike workouts. You select that here, apply and close, etc. Okay. And the other piece of information, again, I'll bring that back. As I said, it was more interesting to have a look at it when you look for lifetime. There we are. Last. Oh, Clara turned. I'll have a look at the last 2 years. Actually, be better off. And there you can see where my Ironman's happen. Right, it's very compressed, but that's obviously where I peaked. And you can see, and that's not a bad thing. That's my off season.
Steve, just go in and add in all the sports again. It's only showing you the bike, which is why your CTL's way too low. Just do all at the bottom there. Yeah.
Sorry, there you go. Okay. And also you see the graphs better. So that would have been actually when I did a mid-season Ironman. I took a bit of time off, and then, as I said, that's a really nice, was a progressive curve. You get that from consistency in the sessions, progressive training load, longer bikes, longer runs, and making sure I cut them. And then, as I said, look, off season, absolutely fine, build up again. And then that I was off season down here, and now I've got injured, so it's going down. Again, all worth with a pinch of salt because your CTL is going down because you're resting off season. And what I talked about as well in terms of your predicted CTL, if you go to home, this shows you where you should have your kind of all your race mapped out. And this is your, as I said, the predicted CTL for what I'm actually going to be training for an Ironman Texas. So at the moment, I've gone down in my CTL on my fitness because I said I'm detraining because I'm resting. And because Mark hasn't put any other sessions in my plan for the moment, because we don't know what I'm doing yet before when I can go back, it just shows that I'm going to be, was it 0 CTL by Texas, which is wrong. So that's why, as I said, you need to take it with a pinch of salt. If you've got a plan populated in there, it will give you some sort of indicator of the arrow should be going up. but some, if they're not built by TSS, don't worry about it. Okay. Myself and Mark have talked for a fair bit. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to stop the recording. And then we'll have some Q&A. Okay, so guys, thanks very much for dialing in. So we're watching the Zoom link later on. As I said, please do attend the other sessions, because we've, like, people have Q&A. I can't have people's faces popping up in the recordings. So this is why we're going to cut you here. Any questions, pop me an email or Mark at info@smartinsurancesolutions.com.